The courtroom camera captured the exact moment when everything fell apart. Karen Stevens sat in the plaintiff's chair, her designer handbag clutched like a shield, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently against the wooden armrest as Judge Judy reviewed the case file with that expression regular viewers knew meant someone was about to get destroyed. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, but Karen seemed oblivious to the danger she was in. She had walked into America's toughest courtroom believing this would be an easy victory, a simple case of making her neighbor pay for damages that she absolutely deserved. What she didn't know was that her own husband was sitting in the third row of the gallery, and he had already made a decision that would not only cost her the case, but would detonate her entire life on national television in front of millions of viewers. But here's what makes this story absolutely insane, what transforms it from just another small claims dispute into the most viral courtroom moment of the year. This wasn't going to be Judge Judy who destroyed Karen's case. It wasn't going to be the defendant's lawyer or some surprise witness. The person who would completely obliterate Karen's lawsuit, expose her lies, and humiliate her in front of the entire country was the one man she thought would always have her back no matter what. Her husband Michael, a respected corporate attorney who had spent 15 years married to this woman, was about to stand up in that courtroom and do something so shocking, so unprecedented, that even Judge Judy herself would be left momentarily speechless. And what he revealed in those devastating 47 seconds would not only lose Karen $12,000, it would cost her everything she had spent years building. Picture this scene carefully because you need to understand just how confident Karen was walking into this disaster. She had spent 3 entire years, waging a calculated campaign against her neighbor Linda Chin. 3 years of complaints, harassment, and manufactured disputes, all because Linda refused to sell her property to Karen at a price far below market value. Karen wanted to expand her backyard, wanted to build the pool and entertainment area she'd been dreaming about, and Linda's modest home stood exactly where Karen's Pinterest-perfect vision demanded it should be removed. When Hurricane Beatrice swept through their Connecticut suburbs 6 months ago, dropping a massive oak tree from Linda's yard onto Karen's luxury SUV, Karen saw her opportunity. Not just an opportunity for a new car, but a chance to financially destroy Linda Chin so completely that she'd have no choice but to sell her home and disappear from the neighborhood forever. Karen had filed a lawsuit demanding $12,000, claiming that Linda had negligently maintained a diseased and dangerous tree that any responsible property owner would have removed years ago. She told Judge Judy that the tree had obvious signs of rot and decay, that Linda had been warned multiple times by neighbors about the danger, and that this disaster was entirely preventable if Linda had just done the responsible thing. Her testimony was delivered with the kind of righteous indignation that only someone who truly believes in their own victimhood can muster. She described in vivid detail how the tree had crushed her Mercedes SUV, how traumatized she had been by the sound of splitting wood and shattering glass, how she had suffered nightmares about what could have happened if she had been in the vehicle at the time. Judge Judy listened with that patient expression that experienced viewers recognized as the calm before the storm, asking seemingly innocent questions about the condition of the tree, about any inspections or expert opinions, about the actual damage to the vehicle. That's when Karen made her first crucial mistake. When Judge Judy asked directly whether she had any professional assessment of the tree's condition before the storm, Karen rolled her eyes in that condescending way entitled people do when they think someone is asking a stupid question. She actually sighed dramatically before responding that she didn't need some expensive expert to tell her what was obvious to anyone with functioning eyesight. The tree was rotting, it was dangerous, and Linda Chen was negligent, period. Judge Judy's eyebrow raised slightly, that telltale sign that she had just caught someone in a lie or a trap, and Karen was too arrogant to even notice the shift in atmosphere. She continued digging her own grave, explaining that people like Linda who don't maintain their properties properly shouldn't be allowed to live in nice neighborhoods, that property values suffer when irresponsible owners refuse to take care of dangerous situations, and that this lawsuit was really about teaching Linda a lesson about accountability and responsibility. The defendant, Linda Chen, sat quietly in her chair looking exhausted and defeated. This 62-year-old widow had been dealing with Karen's harassment for 3 solid years, and the weight of it showed in every line of her face. She had brought a simple folder of documents to defend herself, and when Judge Judy asked her to explain her side, Linda's voice was soft and resigned. She explained that the tree had been healthy, that she had maintained her property carefully, and that the storm that knocked it down had produced winds exceeding 80 miles per hour. It was an act of God, a natural disaster that no one could have prevented or predicted. Karen actually laughed out loud at this testimony, a sharp, mocking sound that made several audience members gasp at the disrespect. That's when Judge Judy's expression hardened into something dangerous, and that's when Michael Stevens, sitting in the third row with his head in his hands, made his decision. He couldn't let this continue. He couldn't watch his wife commit perjury on national television. He couldn't be complicit in fraud any longer. He stood up, and the entire trajectory of the case, of their marriage, of multiple lives, changed forever in that single moment. The movement in the gallery was so sudden, so unexpected, that it momentarily froze everyone in the courtroom. Michael Stevens rose from his seat with the kind of deliberate, measured movement that spoke of a man who had wrestled with this decision for weeks and had finally reached the point of no return. His 6'2" frame commanded attention as he stood there in his expensive suit, looking every inch the successful attorney he was, and when he cleared his throat to speak, the sound cut through the tension like a gunshot. Judge Judy's head snapped toward him with laser focus, her expression shifting from irritation at the interruption to curiosity about what could possibly be important enough for an audience member to stand during active proceedings. Karen turned in her chair, and the moment she saw her husband standing there, her face went through a rapid series of expressions that the cameras captured in perfect detail. First confusion, then a flicker of hope that maybe Michael was going to support her testimony, then something darker as she recognized the expression on his face. "Your Honor," Michael said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do, "may I say something to this court?" Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, that slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth that regular viewers knew meant she sensed something significant was about to happen. She had presided over thousands of cases in her decades on the bench, and she had developed an almost supernatural instinct for when the truth was about to emerge from unexpected places. "Mr. Stevens," she said, because she had already glanced at the case file and knew exactly who this man was, "you're not a party to this case. You're sitting in the gallery as a spectator. What could you possibly have to contribute that would be relevant to these proceedings?" Michael took a deep breath, and in that pause, Karen's whispered plea of Michael, not carried clearly through the courtroom microphones, her voice already tinged with panic because she knew her husband well enough to recognize when he had reached a breaking point. "Your Honor," Michael continued, ignoring his wife's desperate attempt to silence him, "I'm an attorney with Morrison and Blake in Hartford, and I have information that is directly relevant to this case. Information that goes to the heart of the plaintiff's credibility and the validity of her claims. I believe the court needs to hear the truth before rendering a judgment that would be based on false testimony and fraudulent evidence." The courtroom erupted in murmurs at this declaration, and Judge Judy raised her hand for silence, her eyes never leaving Michael's face as she evaluated whether to allow this highly irregular intervention. Karen had gone pale, her earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist as she realized that her own husband was about to testify against her in front of millions of viewers. She grabbed at his sleeve as he moved toward the front of the courtroom, but he gently pulled away from her grasp, his face set in an expression of grim determination. Judge Judy made her decision quickly. "Mr. Stevens, approach the bench. I want to know exactly what you think is so important that you're willing to interrupt these proceedings and apparently testify against your own wife." Michael walked down the aisle with steady steps, and Judge Judy gestured for him to stand where he could address the court properly. The bailiff moved closer, uncertain about protocol for this unprecedented situation, but Judge Judy waved him back slightly. She wanted to hear what this man had to say, because in her extensive experience, when a spouse was willing to publicly contradict their partner in a legal proceeding, the truth was usually about to emerge in a spectacular fashion. Michael stood before the bench and began speaking with the clear, measured tones of someone who had rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times but was still struggling with the emotional weight of what he was doing. "Your Honor, my wife's testimony today has not been truthful. The tree that fell on our vehicle during Hurricane Beatrice was not diseased, was not rotting, and was not dangerous. I know this for a fact because 3 months before the storm, Karen insisted that we have the tree inspected by a certified arborist. She was already planning this harassment campaign against Linda Chen, already looking for ways to force our neighbor to sell her property, and she thought if she could prove the tree was dangerous, she could use it as leverage." The courtroom went dead silent except for Karen's sharp intake of breath. Michael continued, his voice growing stronger as the truth poured out. "The arborist, a man named Dr. Robert Martinez from Hartford Tree Services, conducted a thorough examination of that oak tree. He provided a detailed report stating that the tree was completely healthy, structurally sound, and posed no danger to surrounding properties. He gave Linda Chen a clean bill of health certificate for that tree, and I have a copy of that report right here." Michael pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket, and Judge Judy's eyebrows rose as she gestured for him to hand it over. Karen stood up from her chair, her voice rising to a near shriek as she screamed, "Michael, what are you doing? You're destroying everything." "Sit down," Judge Judy commanded, her voice cracking like a whip, and Karen collapsed back into her seat as if her legs had given out beneath her. Judge Judy examined the document Michael had provided, her expression growing more severe with each line she read. "Mr. Stevens," she said carefully, "you're telling this court that your wife not only knew this tree was healthy, but that she has knowingly committed perjury today by claiming it was diseased and dangerous?" Michael nodded, and the weight of that gesture seemed to physically hurt him. "Yes, Your Honor. And there's more you need to know about why this lawsuit was really filed and what my wife has been doing to Linda Chen for the past 3 years." The transformation in the courtroom atmosphere was total and complete. What had started as a straightforward property damage case had just exploded into something far more serious, and everyone present understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. Karen sat frozen in her chair, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly as she tried to process the betrayal of her husband's testimony. Linda Chen looked up with the first glimmer of hope she had felt in months, realizing that vindication might actually be possible. And Judge Judy leaned forward with the focused intensity of a predator that had just spotted weakness in its prey, ready to extract every detail of the truth that had been hidden beneath Karen's lies. Judge Judy's voice cut through the shocked silence with surgical precision. "Mr. Stevens, I want you to explain to this court exactly what you mean by that statement. What has your wife been doing to Miss Chen for the past 3 years? And I want to remind you that you are speaking under the penalty of perjury, even though this is not a formal criminal proceeding. Everything you say here is being recorded and can be used against you or your wife in future legal actions. Do you understand that?" Michael nodded solemnly, his jaw set in that way that showed he had fully committed to this path and there would be no turning back now. "Your Honor, I understand completely. And that's precisely why I'm here. I took an oath when I became an attorney to uphold the law and pursue justice, and I cannot sit silently while my wife commits fraud in my name using funds from our joint accounts to pursue a lawsuit that I explicitly told her not to file." The revelation hit the courtroom like a physical force. Karen let out a sound that was half gasp and half sob, her hands flying to cover her mouth as if she could somehow take back what her husband had just revealed. But Michael was just getting started, and the floodgates had opened on 3 years of secrets, manipulation, and harassment that he had witnessed with growing horror. "Your Honor, my wife has been waging a systematic campaign of harassment against Linda Chen ever since we moved into our neighborhood 4 years ago. Karen wanted to buy Linda's property so she could expand our backyard and build an entertainment area she had been planning. Linda's home sits on a beautiful corner lot with mature trees and a small garden that Linda's late husband planted before he passed away. Linda politely declined Karen's initial offers because that home represents her last connection to her husband, and she has no intention of selling it at any price." Judge Judy listened intently, making notes while Michael continued his devastating testimony. When Linda refused to sell, Karen became obsessed with forcing her out of the neighborhood. She started with complaints to the Homeowners Association, claiming that Linda's garden violated community standards even though dozens of other homes had similar landscaping. When that didn't work, she called code enforcement repeatedly, filing false reports about everything from overgrown grass to supposed structural violations. Every single complaint was investigated and dismissed because Linda maintains her property beautifully. Karen then escalated to calling the police, claiming at various times that Linda was threatening her, that Linda's visitors were suspicious and possibly dealing drugs, and that Linda was violating noise ordinances with parties that never actually happened. "I know this because I reviewed the police reports after officers came to our door asking Karen to stop filing false complaints." The audience members were audibly gasping now, and several were shaking their heads in disbelief at the scope of harassment Michael was describing. Linda Chen sat with tears streaming down her face, finally having someone validate the nightmare she had been living through for years. Karen had shrunk down in her chair, her earlier arrogance completely evaporated as her husband systematically dismantled the facade she had constructed. Michael's voice carried a note of shame as he continued. "Your Honor, I am deeply ashamed that I did not stop this sooner. I told myself that Karen would eventually give up, that she would realize how wrong her behavior was, but I was enabling her by my silence. When Hurricane Beatrice hit 6 months ago and that tree fell on our Mercedes, I actually felt relieved at first because I thought it would give Karen something else to focus on besides tormenting our neighbor. The insurance company covered most of the damage, and we received a check for $11,000 to repair the vehicle." Judge Judy's eyes narrowed dangerously. "So the vehicle was already paid for by insurance?" Michael nodded miserably. "Yes, Your Honor. The SUV was repaired 2 months ago and is sitting in our driveway right now. This lawsuit is not about recovering damages for a destroyed vehicle. This lawsuit is about financially destroying Linda Chen. Karen calculated that even if Linda won the case, the legal fees and stress of defending herself would push her towards selling her home just to escape the harassment. And when I discovered that Karen had filed this lawsuit without telling me, using funds from our joint account to pay the filing fees, I knew I had reached my breaking point. I confronted her 2 weeks ago and told her she needed to drop this case immediately. She refused. She told me that Linda deserved everything she was getting and more. The courtroom had become so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning was clearly audible. Judge Judy looked at Michael with an expression that mixed respect for his courage with disgust at what he was revealing. Mr. Stevens, you mentioned that Miss Chen was given a clean bill of health certificate for that tree. Does your wife still have a copy of that certificate? Michael's answer landed like a bomb. Your Honor, Karen destroyed her copy the day after we received it because it didn't support her narrative. But I kept a copy in my office files because I knew she was planning something. I also have copies of the police reports documenting her false complaints, statements from 3 other neighbors who have witnessed her harassment of Linda, and email correspondence where Karen explicitly states her intention to force Linda to sell by making her life unbearable. I brought all of it with me today because I cannot be complicit in this fraud any longer. Judge Judy accepted the additional documents Michael produced, a thick folder that represented 3 years of documented harassment and manipulation. Karen finally found her voice, standing up from her chair with her face flushed red with rage and humiliation. How dare you, she screamed at Michael, her voice breaking with emotion. How dare you come here and humiliate me like this? You're supposed to be my husband. You're supposed to support me. Michael turned to face her directly, and his response was delivered with devastating calm. I am your husband, Karen. And that's exactly why I'm doing this. Because someone has to stop you before you destroy yourself completely. Because enabling your behavior is not love, it's cowardice. And because Linda Chen deserves justice after 3 years of hell that you put her through. Karen's response was to burst into tears, but these were not tears of remorse or understanding. These were tears of rage and self-pity from someone who had finally been held accountable and could not accept the reality of her own actions. The transformation in Karen Stevens was as complete as it was instantaneous. The poised, confident woman who had walked into the courtroom an hour earlier had been replaced by a sobbing, desperate figure who seemed to be unraveling in real time before millions of viewers. Her carefully styled hair had come loose from its pins as she ran her shaking hands through it repeatedly. Her designer makeup was streaking down her face in dark rivulets, and her expensive outfit now looked like a costume she had worn to a party where she desperately did not belong. She pointed an accusing finger at Michael, her voice rising to a pitch that bordered on hysteria. You planned this. You've been planning to humiliate me all along. This is about that paralegal at your office, isn't it? You're trying to leave me and you thought destroying me on national television would make it easier. Judge Judy's gavel came down hard, the sharp crack of wood on wood cutting through Karen's tirade like a knife. Sit down, Mrs. Stevens, and control yourself, or I will have you removed from this courtroom and you will lose this case by default. Karen collapsed back into her chair, but the accusations kept pouring out between her sobs. He's lying to you, Your Honor. He's having an affair and he's trying to make me look bad so he can leave me and take everything. He probably put Linda up to this whole thing. They're probably working together. Michael's face remained impassive, but Judge Judy could see the pain in his eyes at his wife's desperate attempts to deflect blame onto anyone but herself. Mrs. Stevens, Judge Judy said with ice in her voice, your husband just committed professional suicide to tell the truth. Attorneys do not lightly testify against their spouses. The fact that he is willing to potentially face ethics complaints, damage his own reputation, and destroy his marriage tells me everything I need to know about who is telling the truth in this courtroom. Karen tried a different approach, her voice taking on a wheedling, pleading quality that made several audience members visibly uncomfortable. Your Honor, please, you have to understand. I've been under so much stress. The neighborhood, the pressure to maintain appearances, the competition with the other families. Linda's property brings down our property values. I was just trying to protect our investment. Everyone does things they regret when they're stressed. Michael doesn't understand the pressure women face in these suburban communities. Judge Judy's expression shifted from stern to absolutely withering. Mrs. Stevens, are you seriously trying to justify 3 years of harassment, filing false police reports, and committing perjury in my courtroom by blaming suburban social pressure? Let me be absolutely clear. I don't care if you live in the most competitive neighborhood in America. I don't care if every other woman on your street drives a nicer car or has a bigger pool. None of that gives you the right to terrorize an innocent widow who just wants to live peacefully in the home her late husband left her. The judge turned her attention to the documents Michael had provided, reading through them with increasing severity. Her expression grew darker with each page, and the silence in the courtroom was oppressive as everyone waited for her response. Finally, she looked up, and her gaze could have melted steel. Mrs. Stevens, I have here documented evidence of 18 separate false complaints you filed against Miss Chen over a 3-year period. 18. I have police reports where officers explicitly warned you about filing false reports and wasting police resources. I have emails where you told your friends, and I quote, I'm going to make that woman's life so miserable she'll beg me to buy her house. I have the arborist report clearly stating that the tree in question was healthy and posed no danger. And I have insurance documents showing that your vehicle damage was already fully compensated. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Karen's response was to dissolve into incoherent sobbing, rocking back and forth in her chair while muttering about how unfair everything was, how no one understood her side, how she was the real victim in all of this. Judge Judy let her cry for exactly 10 seconds before delivering her ruling with the force of a hammer blow. Mrs. Stevens, not only are you not getting $12,000, you are going to pay Miss Linda Chen $8,000. $4,000 for her legal fees in defending this frivolous lawsuit, and $4,000 for emotional distress damages resulting from your 3-year campaign of harassment. Furthermore, I am forwarding copies of all evidence presented today to the Connecticut State Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges including perjury, filing false police reports, and harassment. Finally, I am issuing a restraining order requiring you to stay at least 500 feet away from Miss Chen and her property at all times. The gavel came down with finality, and the sound seemed to physically strike Karen. She let out a wail of anguish that would have been comedic if it weren't so pathetic, her body folding forward as if she had been punched in the stomach. Your Honor, please, I can't pay $8,000. We don't have that kind of money. This will bankrupt us. Judge Judy's response was cold and merciless. You found money to file this fraudulent lawsuit. You found money to maintain your luxury lifestyle while trying to destroy your neighbor's peace of mind. You will find money to pay this judgment, or Miss Chen can garnish your wages and place liens on your property. Your financial situation is not my concern. You should have thought about the consequences before you decided to weaponize the legal system against an innocent person. Case dismissed. We're done here. As the bailiff moved to escort Karen from the courtroom, she made one final attempt to reach her husband, stretching her hand toward Michael with a desperate plea. Michael, please, don't let them do this to me. We can fix this. We can make this right. Just tell them you made a mistake. Please. Michael looked at his wife with an expression that mixed pity, sadness, and resolve. Karen, I filed for divorce this morning. My attorney already served you the papers at the house. You would have found them when you got home tonight. I'm done enabling your behavior. I'm done watching you hurt innocent people. I'm done being married to someone who has no empathy and no accountability. Karen's scream of rage and betrayal echoed through the courthouse hallways as she was led away, and the sound would become one of the most replayed audio clips in the viral video that would rack up over 30 million views in just 48 hours. The moment the courtroom doors closed behind Karen's retreating figure, something extraordinary happened that the cameras captured in perfect detail. Michael Stevens stood in the center of the courtroom looking emotionally exhausted, and Linda Chen slowly rose from her seat, her elderly frame moving with careful deliberation as she approached the man who had just sacrificed his marriage to tell the truth. The audience held its collective breath, uncertain what would happen next, but what unfolded was a moment of grace that would become almost as viral as the dramatic testimony itself. Linda reached out and took Michael's hands in hers, tears streaming down her weathered face, and she spoke words that resonated with millions of viewers. Mr. Stevens, you didn't have to do what you did today. You could have stayed silent. You could have protected yourself. But you chose justice over comfort, and you chose truth over loyalty to someone who was doing wrong. Your integrity just restored 3 years of my faith in humanity. Thank you. Michael's composure finally cracked at those words, and tears began rolling down his cheeks as he accepted Linda's gratitude. Judge Judy watched this exchange with an expression that showed even her legendary toughness was moved by the moment. She addressed Michael directly, her voice softer than it had been throughout the entire proceeding. "Mr. Stevens, what you did today took remarkable courage. You will face consequences for this decision. Your marriage is over. Your wife will likely never forgive you. Some people will question your loyalty and your judgment. But I want you to know that you did the right thing, and that matters more than comfort or convenience. The legal profession needs more attorneys like you, people who understand that our oath to justice supersedes personal relationships when those relationships involve criminal behavior. You've shown today what integrity looks like, and I hope you're proud of that choice even though I know it hurts." The video of Karen's meltdown and Michael's testimony exploded across social media with a velocity that stunned even experienced viral content analysts. Within 12 hours of the episode airing, clips of the courtroom drama had been viewed over 5 million times on YouTube alone. By the end of the first week, the numbers had climbed to 30 million views across all platforms, with millions of shares, comments, and reactions pouring in from every corner of the internet. The hashtag Team Michael began trending worldwide as people debated the ethics of testifying against your spouse, the nature of loyalty versus enabling, and whether Michael had done the right thing. The overwhelming consensus was that he had shown extraordinary courage, though a vocal minority argued that marriage vows should supersede legal obligations and that Michael had betrayed his wife in the worst possible way. News outlets picked up the story with headlines that ranged from respectful to sensational. "Legal ethics expert destroys wife's fraudulent lawsuit on national TV" ran in legal journals. "Husband chooses justice over loyalty in viral courtroom showdown" appeared in mainstream media. "Karen gets destroyed by her own husband" screamed from entertainment websites. The case became a cultural touchstone, referenced in late-night comedy monologues, discussed in law school ethics classes, and debated endlessly on morning talk shows. Michael was interviewed by several news programs, and he handled the attention with remarkable grace, consistently emphasizing that his decision was not about punishing Karen but about stopping behavior that had gone too far and refusing to be complicit in fraud and harassment. The fallout in Karen and Michael's Connecticut neighborhood was swift and severe. Within days of the episode airing, 11 other families came forward with their own stories of harassment and intimidation by Karen Stevens. The local newspaper ran a feature article detailing a pattern of behavior that extended far beyond Linda Chen, revealing that Karen had targeted multiple neighbors over the years for perceived slights or when she wanted something they had. One family revealed that Karen had filed false complaints with Child Protective Services claiming neglect, leading to a traumatic investigation that ultimately cleared the parents but left lasting emotional scars. Another neighbor described how Karen had sabotaged a home sale by spreading false rumors about foundation problems to potential buyers. The picture that emerged was of a woman who had used intimidation, manipulation, and abuse of legal systems as weapons against anyone who stood in her way. The Homeowners Association held an emergency meeting where residents voted unanimously to implement new policies specifically designed to prevent the kind of harassment Karen had perpetrated. They established a review board for all complaints to ensure they had merit before proceeding, implemented penalties for filing false or malicious reports, and created a support system for residents who felt they were being unfairly targeted. The meeting minutes specifically referenced the Judge Judy case as the catalyst for these changes, and several attendees praised Michael Stevens for having the courage to expose behavior that many had witnessed but felt powerless to stop. Property values in the neighborhood actually increased in the months following Karen's departure, as the area gained a reputation for taking harassment seriously and protecting vulnerable residents. 6 months after the courtroom drama, the lives of everyone involved had been fundamentally transformed. Michael Stevens finalized his divorce from Karen, and while the process was predictably contentious, he maintained his composure and his principles throughout. His law firm, rather than censuring him for his courtroom testimony, actually promoted him to senior partner, citing his demonstration of ethical standards and integrity under pressure. The firm used his case in their recruitment materials as an example of the values they expected from their attorneys. Michael received dozens of job offers from other firms impressed by his actions, though he chose to stay with Morrison and Blake. In an interesting twist that delighted social media, Michael began dating Linda Chen's daughter Maria, a school teacher who had supported her mother throughout the years of harassment. Their relationship, which began with Michael's apology and evolved into genuine friendship and eventually romance, became a symbol of how justice and healing can lead to unexpected positive outcomes. Karen Stevens faced serious consequences that extended far beyond the $8,000 judgment and the humiliation of viral infamy. The Connecticut State Attorney's Office did indeed pursue charges against her, and she ultimately accepted a plea deal that included probation, community service, mandatory counseling, and restitution payments to Linda Chen. She was forced to sell the house in the divorce settlement, and she relocated to a different state where she hoped to escape the notoriety of being the most hated Karen in America. Her social media accounts, once full of carefully curated images of suburban perfection, were deleted after being flooded with thousands of critical comments. Some mental health professionals who analyzed the case suggested that Karen suffered from narcissistic personality disorder and an extreme need for control, though others cautioned against armchair diagnosis and emphasized that regardless of any underlying conditions, she remained responsible for her choices and actions. Linda Chen used the $8,000 she received from the judgment to make improvements to her beloved home and garden, the property that represented her last connection to her late husband. She planted new flowers in his memory and installed a small memorial bench where she could sit and remember happier times. She became something of a local celebrity, known for her grace and forgiveness even in the face of years of torment. She declined most interview requests, preferring to let her quiet dignity speak for itself, but she did agree to one television interview where she emphasized that she hoped Karen would eventually find peace and understanding, though that forgiveness did not mean forgetting or excusing the harm that had been done. Linda became president of the Neighborhood Association, where she worked to create a culture of kindness and mutual respect that would prevent future harassment. The case became required viewing in several law school ethics courses, used as an example of the difficult choices attorneys sometimes face when personal relationships conflict with professional obligations. Professor Margaret Williams at Yale Law School incorporated the case into her curriculum, telling her students that Michael Stevens had demonstrated the kind of moral courage that the legal profession desperately needed. She emphasized that being an attorney meant sometimes making choices that destroyed relationships but protected the integrity of the justice system. The case sparked broader conversations about enabling behavior, the difference between loyalty and complicity, and the courage required to hold loved ones accountable when they cross moral and legal lines. Mental health professionals discussed the psychology of entitlement and how enabling can actually harm the person being enabled by preventing them from facing necessary consequences. If this story of courage, justice, and accountability moved you, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now because the battle against entitled behavior and the celebration of integrity is just beginning. Comment below and tell me whether you think Michael did the right thing, whether you could make the same choice in his position, and share your own stories of times when you had to choose between loyalty and doing what was right. Smash that like button if you believe that real love sometimes means letting people face the consequences of their actions, and that enabling harm is not the same as supporting someone you care about. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another case where justice prevails and entitled behavior gets exactly what it deserves. Share this video with someone who needs to see what real integrity looks like, and remember that in the end, the truth always matters more than comfort, justice always matters more than convenience, and having the courage to stand up for what's right is always worth the cost. Next week, we have an even more shocking case where a father testifies against his own son in a fraud case, and what he reveals will leave you absolutely speechless. You won't want to miss it. Until then, remember that accountability is not cruelty, truth is not betrayal, and sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to protect someone from the reality of who they've become. See you in the next one.